The air was heavy with smoke and dust, the kind that stings the eyes and fills the lungs with the taste of ash. In the center of the alien city square, a young woman was dragged forward by two guards, her arms bound with thick chains. Her skin was a pale green that shimmered faintly under the light, but it was covered with bruises and streaks of dried blood. Her long silver hair clung to her face, tangled from the hands that had pulled and struck her on the way here. The crowd pressed close, shouting words of hate. Stones flew from every direction, thudding against her shoulders. Her legs, her back, she stumbled, each step heavier than the last. But she did not cry. Her eyes, bright and unbroken, stared ahead at the massive stone pillar waiting for her. At the end of the square, the pillar was ancient, carved from black rock that swallowed the light. Strange glowing runes ran up its sides, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Around its base lay broken chains and dried stains, the color of rust. It was called the Pillar of Death, and for centuries, it had been the place where traitors were given to the gods. The high priest stood at its foot, his tall headdress swaying in the warm wind. His voice rose over the roar of the crowd. Declaring her crimes, he said she had betrayed her own people, that she had spoken against the will of the gods, that her blood would wash away her sins. The people cheered at every word. Far in the shadows, leaning against a crumbling wall, a human man watched. His face was hidden beneath the brim of a worn cap, his clothes dusty from days of travel. He had seen many things on this planet since his arrival, but nothing quite like this. The woman's defiance stirred something deep in him, something he had not felt for a long time. The guards dragged her to the pillar, forcing her to her knees. The sound of the chains scraping against stone echoed across the square. They locked her wrists behind her back and looped another length of chain around her waist, fastening it tight to the pillar. She winced, but said nothing. Her gaze swept over the faces in the crowd, as if searching for someone. The high priest raised his staff. The drums began, slow at first, then faster. The execution would be held when the red moon rose, just hours away. Until then, she would remain bound, on display for the people to throw. Stones and curses. At the human man's jaw tightened. He glanced at the guards, lazy, confident, believing no one would dare interfere. He knew their type. He could already see the rhythm of their movements, the gaps in their watch. The fear of their gods kept everyone else back, but he did not share that fear. A boy darted forward from the crowd, throwing a sharp stone that cut the woman's cheek. She didn't flinch, didn't look at him. Instead, she lifted her chin slightly higher. Her pride was the only thing they had not chained. The human shifted closer, blending into the shifting crowd. No one noticed him. They were too busy screaming for blood. His eyes never left hers. For a moment, she glanced his way, and in that instant, he thought he saw a silent question in her gaze, a flicker of hope buried under exhaustion. The high priest turned toward the sacred temple, disappearing inside to prepare for the ritual. The guards settled into their posts, leaning on their spears, talking quietly. The crowd began. Too thin, people drifting away to eat and drink before the execution. The human slipped through a narrow gap between two broken market stalls. Now standing closer to the pillar, he could hear her breathing, slow, controlled, as if she was forcing herself to stay calm. He noticed her wrists were raw and bleeding from the chains. The sight made his chest tighten. He spoke softly, low enough that only she could hear. "Don't give up." Her head turned slightly, just enough to show she'd heard him, but she said nothing. He tapped his fingers against the hilt of a small blade hidden beneath his belt. The crowd's noise masked the sound of metal scraping lightly against metal as he tested the blade's edge. The woman closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them, staring into the horizon where the red moon would rise. She knew the ritual well. Once the drums began, under that cursed light, there would be no stopping it. The human stepped back, melting into the shifting crowd once more. His mind was already working, planning, measuring time, The pillar stood like a dark shadow against the sky, the chains glinting faintly. He knew one thing with absolute certainty. When the red moon rose, she would not be there, not if he had anything to say about it. In the distance, the first thin edge of the red moon began to climb over the jagged rooftops. The drums would start soon, and with them, the countdown to death. The woman straightened her back against the pillar, her chains rattling softly, and somewhere in the crowd, a man she had never met before was about to defy an entire city. The red moon was still climbing, its glow turning the dust in the air into a deep shade of crimson. The city's noise was distant now, but in the square, the pillar still stood like a dark heart. The woman remained chained to it, her body still and her eyes fixed on nothing. From the shadows of an abandoned market stall, the human crouched low, watching every movement around her. He had counted the guards, 6 in total, too close to the pillar for pacing in a lazy circle. Their armor clinked faintly when they walked, and their boots scuffed the ground. In a rhythm he could predict, they were confident, sure that no one would challenge the gods' will. But he was not from here, and the gods they feared were nothing to him. He scanned the square again, memorizing each torch's position. Each one cast a sharp beam of light, but left long strips of darkness between them, shadows deep enough for him to disappear in. From his pocket, he pulled out the shard of metal he had hidden for 3 days. It was rough and uneven, likely broken from a larger blade, but sharp enough to cut rope or pry open a weak lock. He turned it over in his fingers, feeling its cold edge. It was small, but it was all he had. A voice startled him. Low and rough, an old alien man was leaning against the wall beside him, his eyes sunken but alert. "You're watching her," the old man said, not as a question. "You'll get yourself killed if you try anything." The human didn't answer. His eyes stayed on the pillar. "They say the pillar is cursed," the old man went on. "Touch it, and the gods will mark you. You'll carry their wrath until you die." He spat on the ground. "But maybe you're too foolish to care." Finally, the human looked at him. "I don't care about curses," he said quietly. "I care about chains." The old man stared at him for a moment, then chuckled without humor. "Chains are heavier when they're in your mind," he said, before limping away, disappearing into the darkness. The human shifted closer to the crowd's edge. A group of drunk merchants laughed as they stumbled past. One of them tossed a small pebble toward the pillar, missing by several feet. The woman didn't even glance at them. He moved again, his boots silent on the dusty ground. Each step brought him closer to the pillar's shadow. The guards weren't watching him. They were watching the crowd, the temple, the sky, anything but the spaces between. The woman's head lifted slightly when she saw him. Her eyes followed his movements, without giving any sign to the guards. He caught her gaze for just a second, and in that silent moment, a message passed between them. "Wait." The human ducked behind a row of large clay water jars. Their rounded shapes hid his form perfectly. From here, he could see the chain that wrapped around her wrists. The lock was thick but old. The metal shard might be enough if he had time. He waited, breathing slow, letting the city's noise settle into the background. The red moon was almost halfway up now. The ritual would start soon. The crowd would return. The priests would chant. And then the blade would fall. But he wasn't going to let it reach that point. His mind played the steps like a map. First, take out the nearest guard quickly and quietly. Second, break the wrist chain. Free her arms. Third, get her away from the square before the others realized what had happened. It sounded simple, but he knew one mistake could end them both. The sound of heavy doors creaking open drew his attention to the temple. The high priest emerged, carrying a long ceremonial blade. The crowd began to gather again, drawn by the promise of blood. The human's pulse quickened. His time was running out. One of the guards near the pillar turned his back for a moment, adjusting his belt strap. That was the opening. The human slid forward, the metal shard tight in his grip. His steps were silent, his body low. The crowd's noise covered the faint scrape of his boots on stone. The woman's breath caught as he reached her side. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His hand moved quickly, pressing the shard to the lock, twisting, forcing the rusted metal to give. It creaked faintly, loud enough that he froze for a second, listening for the guard's reaction. Nothing. The guard was still adjusting his belt. The other was watching the priest. The lock shifted a little under the pressure. Not enough to break yet, but it was close. He forced himself to step back, blending once more into the shadows before anyone noticed. The woman's fingers flexed slightly, testing the chain. She knew now. He was going to try again. He had a plan, and she was part of it. From across the square, the high priest lifted the ceremonial blade high. His voice boomed as he called on the gods to watch the sacrifice. The crowd cheered. The drums began again. Faster this time. The human's hand tightened around the shard. His heart was steady. His path was clear. In minutes, the chaos of the ritual would give him his cover, and then he would break her chains. And when that happened, the whole city would learn what it meant for a human to defy fate. The night sky was no longer black. It glowed with the deep crimson light of the red moon, its round body climbing higher above the jagged roofs of the alien city. The air felt heavier, as if the very world was holding its breath. The square was crowded again. Bodies pressed shoulder to shoulder, faces turned toward the pillar of death. The drums were louder now, their deep beat rolling like thunder. Priests in long, black robes circled the pillar, their voices rising in strange guttural chants that seemed to echo in the bones. The woman was still chained to the pillar. Her back was straight, her head high, but her wrists were bleeding where the iron bit into her skin. Her silver hair caught the moonlight, glowing faintly. She looked almost unreal, like a statue, carved for the gods themselves. The human was there too, hidden among the crowd. His eyes moved constantly from the guards to the priests, to the shadows between the torches. The time for planning was almost over. The moment to act was close. The high priest raised his staff, the blade of the sacrifice gleaming in his other hand. The chanting stopped all at once. The silence that followed was sharp. The crowd leaned forward as if they could drink in the moment. The human's pulse slowed, his breathing deepened. He began to push his way forward, moving like a shadow between taller aliens who didn't notice him. Every step took him closer to the pillar, closer to her. One of the guards shifted his stance. The other turned to glance at the crowd. The human froze. He knew that one wrong move now would ruin everything. But then the drums started again, faster and louder. The guards turned their attention back to the priest. The human slid forward until he could feel the heat from the torches. His hand closed around the shard of metal, hidden under his sleeve. He kept his head down, looking like just another worshipper. The woman's eyes moved, searching the crowd. She saw him, just a few steps away. Her breath caught, but she didn't move. The chain around her waist clinked softly when she shifted her weight. The high priest began the final chant, his voice deep and commanding. The crowd echoed each word, raising their hands toward the red moon. The priests stepped closer to the pillar, their long sleeves brushing the ground. The human moved in, his shoulder brushed against the nearest guard, who didn't even look at him, too focused on the ritual. That was the gap he needed. He stepped behind the pillar, the shadow swallowing him for just a second. His hand worked quickly, pressing the shard against the lock on her wrists. The rusted metal groaned softly. She turned her head just enough to whisper, "Hurry." The lock shifted, but it didn't break. He gritted his teeth, twisting harder. Sweat ran down the side of his face. The drums were pounding faster now, the chanting almost at its peak. A flicker of movement caught his eye, one of the guards turning toward him. The human stepped back instantly, melting into the crowd as if he had been there the whole time. The guard's eyes swept past him without pause. The woman kept her face forward, not letting even a twitch of relief show. She knew he would come back. She could feel it. The high priest lifted the ceremonial blade high. The red moon's light gleamed along its edge. He shouted the final words, his voice echoing against the stone walls of the square. The human's heart slammed against his ribs. It was now or never. He pushed forward hard, ignoring the gasps of those he shoved aside. His feet barely made a sound against the dusty ground. The torchlight flashed across his face as he moved faster, lower, closer. The guard nearest the pillar glanced away for just 1 second. The human dropped to one knee, his hands on the lock. This time he didn't hold back. The shard bit into the metal, twisting, scraping, forcing it to give. The lock snapped open with a faint crack. The chain loosened around her wrists. She gasped softly, feeling blood rush back into her hands. But before he could undo the chain around her waist, a shout rang out. One of the guards had spotted him. The human didn't run. He stepped in front of her, his eyes locked on the approaching soldiers. The crowd erupted in confused noise. Some shouted for the guards to kill him. Others just stared. The high priest's voice rose again, furious. Seize them. The woman's hands were free now. She grabbed the length of loose chain, wrapping it around her fists like a weapon. The human glanced at her, and for a moment, they both understood there would be no going back after this. The guards charged. The human shifted his stance, ready. The drums pounded like war. The red moon burned above. And in that moment, the sacrifice had changed. It was no longer the woman's life at the pillar. It was the city's order, their fear, their faith, all about to be shattered. The first guard reached them with his spear raised. But the human moved before the weapon could strike. He grabbed the shaft and yanked it sideways, pulling the guard off balance. The man's knee slammed into the guard's chest, sending him crashing into the dust. The crowd gasped. Some stepped back in fear. Others pressed closer to see. The priests shouted for order, their voices drowned out by the roar of the drums. The second guard lunged in, but the woman swung the length of chain wrapped around her wrists. The metal links whipped across his face. With a sharp crack, he stumbled back, clutching his cheek. The human dropped to his knees and went for the lock on her waist. The shard of metal bit into it, twisting against the rust. The lock resisted, squealing like an animal. The high priest's voice boomed above the chaos. Stop them. The gods are watching. But the human didn't stop. His arm ached, his fingers cramped, but he kept twisting. Sweat dripped into his eyes. The woman stood over him, using the chain like a whip to keep the other guards back. Her strikes were fast and precise, born of desperation. Another guard rushed in from the side. The human kicked his leg out, catching the man in the knee. The guard fell forward, and the woman slammed the chain down across his helmet with a ringing clang. The lock gave a sudden sharp snap. The chain around her waist fell loose. She gasped in disbelief. She was free. The human grabbed her arm. Move, he shouted, but the word was swallowed by the chaos. They ran, pushing through the crowd. The people screamed and scattered. Some tried to block their way, shouting that the gods would curse them, but they were too afraid to stand in the path of the freed prisoner and the human who had defied the ritual. The guards regrouped and gave chase. Spears flashed in the red moonlight. The human pulled the woman into a narrow alley between two crumbling walls. Their footsteps echoed on the uneven stone. Behind them, the high priest roared orders. The sound of armored feet grew louder. The woman's chains clinked as she ran, heavy in her hands, but useful as a weapon. This way, she shouted, leading him through a twisting path that seemed too narrow for soldiers in armor. The alley spilled into a wider street lined with shuttered market stalls. The smell of dried spices and dust filled the air. Torches flickered at the far end, where more guards were blocking the way. The human slowed just enough to look around. His eyes landed on a stack of large clay barrels. He rushed over and pushed hard, sending them rolling into the street. They crashed into the guards, shattering into shards and a cloud of spice powder. The soldiers coughed and stumbled. Blinded for a moment, they sprinted past before the guards could recover. The city square was far behind now, but the sounds of pursuit were still close. The woman's breaths came quick, her steps uneven. She had been chained for too long. Her legs weak. The human kept one arm around her, half carrying her when she stumbled. They turned another corner and found themselves at the edge of the city wall. The gates were in sight, but they were already closing. Heavy wooden doors grinding shut under the pull of thick chains. The woman's eyes widened. If those close were trapped, the human scanned the wall, looking for another way. That's when he saw it. A narrow stone stair leading to a watchtower. From there, they might reach the top of the wall and drop down the other side. Up there, he pointed, pulling her toward the stairs. They climbed fast, their footsteps echoing below. Guards spilled into the street, shouting and pointing. The woman glanced back once, her jaw tight. Her people were chasing her like she was an animal. But tonight, she was done bowing her head. They reached the top of the tower. The wind hit them hard, carrying the smells of the wildlands beyond the city. The wall stretched wide and high, lit by the blood-red glow of the moon. The human helped her up onto the edge. Her chains rattled as she steadied herself. A shout rose below. Guards were already climbing after them. The human didn't hesitate. He swung himself over the side, hanging by his hands. Then he looked up at her. "Jump, I'll catch you." She hesitated only a second before dropping. He caught her, the weight slamming into his arms and shoulders. They hit the ground together in a roll, the impact knocking the breath from his chest. They got to their feet, running into the darkness, beyond the city lights. The drums still pounded in the distance, the high priest's voice echoing faintly. But the pillar was behind them now, and the chains that had held her were lying broken on the stone. The wind outside the city was colder, carrying the scent of ash and dry grass. The human and the alien woman ran through the open fields, their feet pounding against the earth. The red moon's light followed them like a watchful eye. Behind them, the city wall glowed with torchlight. Horns blared, calling every guard to join the hunt. The sound of armored boots grew faint, then loud again, as search parties spread out through the dark. The woman stumbled, her legs shaking from exhaustion. The human caught her before she fell, his arm wrapped firmly around her waist, pulling her forward. "We can't stop," he said, his voice low but urgent. They pushed through a patch of tall grass, the blades whispering against their skin. Ahead, the land dipped into a narrow valley, where the air shimmered faintly. The woman froze, her eyes narrowing. "Smoke," she whispered. A faint orange glow flickered at the far end of the valley. The human's stomach tightened. He smelled it too. Fire, not the gentle fire of campfires, but the sharp, hungry kind that eats through everything. They moved closer, keeping low. As they reached the edge of the valley, they saw the source, a barricade of burning carts blocking the only road leading out. Flames roared high, spitting sparks into the air. On the other side, silhouettes of soldiers waited, spears glinting in the moonlight. "They're hurting us," the human muttered. "They knew we'd come this way." The woman's chains rattled softly as she gripped them tighter. "There's another way," she said, pointing to a narrow path along the edge of the valley wall. It was steep, the rocks sharp, but it would bypass the barricade. The human nodded. They climbed, hands gripping jagged stone, dirt crumbling under their feet. The wind carried sparks from the fire, some landing hot on their skin, but they kept moving. Halfway up, a shout echoed from below. Guards had spotted them. Arrows whistled through the air. One struck the rock just inches from the human's hand. "Faster," he called. The woman's bare feet slipped once, but his hand caught her wrist and pulled her up. Her breathing was ragged, but her eyes burned with determination. They reached the top of the ridge, looking down on the soldiers by the fire. The human could see their armor glinting red from the flames. The smell of burning wood and oil choked the air. They moved along the ridge, staying low. Every step brought them closer to the far side of the valley. But then a new sound reached them, the pounding of hooves. From the darkness ahead, a mounted patrol emerged. Their alien steeds had black scales and glowing eyes. Moving with the speed of the wind, The rider spotted them immediately and turned. To cut them off, the woman spun her chain in a quick loop, the links hissing through the air. The human pulled the shard of metal from his belt, his only weapon. The first rider charged, the beast's jaws opening to reveal sharp teeth. The human sidestepped at the last moment, grabbing the rider's arm and pulling him from the saddle. The alien crashed into the dirt, the beast skidding to a stop in confusion. The woman lashed her chain at the second rider's face, knocking him sideways. He fell with a grunt, rolling down the slope. The remaining riders pulled back for another pass. The human didn't wait. He grabbed the reins of the loose beast and swung himself onto its back. He reached down, offering his hand to the woman. She hesitated only a moment before taking it. He hauled her up behind him, her arms wrapping tightly around his waist. "Hold on," he said, kicking the beast forward. The creature leaped down the far side of the ridge, hooves striking sparks on the rocks. The wind tore past them, the ground a blur beneath. Behind them, the riders shouted and gave chase. The valley floor opened into a stretch of wild land, dotted with dead trees. In the distance, a faint blue light flickered the glow of the ancient ruins the woman had mentioned earlier. "That's where we go," she said in his ear, her voice barely louder than the wind. The human steered the beast toward the ruins, weaving between trees to break the rider's line of sight. The sound of pursuit faded, little by little, until only the beast's heavy breathing and their own heartbeats filled the night. When they finally slowed, the ruins rose before them, broken stone arches standing like the ribs of a giant, long dead. Strange glowing moss clung to the walls, casting pale light over the cracked ground. They slid off the beast, which snorted and trotted away into the shadows. The human scanned the area. Quiet, too quiet. The woman stepped closer to one of the arches, her eyes fixed on a symbol carved deep into the stone. "We're not safe yet," she said softly. "This place, it's not just old stone, it's where the gods were said to walk." The human's brow furrowed. "Then we'll walk here too," he said, his voice steady, far behind them. The red glow of the burning barricade still stained the horizon. The hunt was far from over, but they had escaped the city. They had passed through fire and lived. For now, that was enough. The ruins were silent, but the silence was not the safe kind. It was the kind that made the air feel thick, the kind that made every step sound too loud. The human scanned the broken stone arches and shattered walls. His eyes kept moving, searching for movement. The red moonlight spilled over the moss-covered ground, but the shadows between the stones were too deep. The woman walked ahead, her bare feet making no sound. She kept glancing at the carvings on the walls, long lines of symbols that glowed faintly. "These ruins," she whispered, "were once the gate to the underworld." The human frowned. "Underworld?" She nodded. "A place below this land, older than the cities, older than our people. The gods were said to keep their guardians there." They moved deeper, the stone passages narrowing until they came to a dark opening in the ground. Cold air rose from it, smelling of metal and something faintly sweet. The human stepped closer and peered down. He saw nothing but darkness. Then, two faint lights blinked back at him. The woman froze, her hand tightening around the chain in her grip. "It's awake," she whispered. The lights moved, slow and deliberate, growing brighter until they took shape, not eyes, but glowing crystal orbs set deep in the head of something massive. A low rumble rolled up from the pit, shaking dust from the stones. The human stepped back, pulling the woman with him just as the creature rose. It emerged like a nightmare-given flesh, part metal, part muscle, its body plated in dark armor that looked grown, not built. Long claws scraped the stone as it climbed. Its mouth opened, showing rows of blade-like teeth. The ground trembled with its weight. Its head turned toward them, the glowing orbs focusing on their shapes. "Run," the human asked. "Too late," the woman answered. The beast lunged. Its claws tore at the ground, spraying shards of rock. The human grabbed the woman's arm and pulled her to the side. The beast smashed into a wall where they had stood, sending cracks racing up the stone. The woman swung her chain, the links wrapping around one of the beast's front legs. She pulled hard, trying to trip it. The creature roared, its voice echoing like thunder. The human darted in, slashing at the beast's joint with his metal shard. Sparks flew where metal met metal, but the shard barely scratched it. The beast twisted, its tail sweeping through the air like a whip. The blow caught the human across the chest, sending him rolling over the ground. He gasped, the air knocked from his lungs. The woman shouted his name and yanked on the chain, trying to keep the beast's attention. The creature turned toward her, its glowing eyes narrowing. It stepped forward, each movement slow but powerful. The human forced himself to his feet. His ribs ached, but he ignored the pain. He spotted a broken pillar leaning at an angle above them. Its base cracked. If he could bring it down. He ran toward it, climbing over rubble. The beast's head turned at the sound, but the woman shouted, swinging the chain again. The links smacked against its armored neck, leaving faint dents. The human reached the base of the pillar and began pushing. His muscles burned, the stone barely shifting. The beast roared and lunged for the woman, claws tearing at the ground. Move, the human shouted. She dove aside, the chain slipping from her hands. The beast's head snapped toward him, just as the pillar gave way. The massive stone column crashed down onto the beast's back, forcing it to the ground with a deafening crack. Dust and shards of stone filled the air. The beast struggled, its legs kicking, but the pillar pinned it down. The human didn't wait. He grabbed the woman's arm and pulled her toward the far side of the ruins. They ran, the ground shaking behind them as the beast thrashed. Its roar followed them, a sound of rage and hunger that promised it would not stay trapped forever. They reached a narrow archway that led out of the ruins. The cold night air hit them again, carrying the faint smell of the wildlands. The woman leaned against the wall, her breath sharp. You fought it, she said, looking at him. No one from my people would have done that. The human met her gaze. Chains or monsters. It doesn't matter. You don't leave someone behind. Her eyes softened for a moment, but then she glanced back, toward the ruins. The roaring had stopped. The silence was heavy again. We need to move, she said. If it frees itself, it will hunt us. The human nodded. Together they slipped into the darkness, the red moon lighting their path. Behind them, deep in the ruins, a faint cracking sound echoed, followed by the low growl of something that was not done with them yet. The wind carried them away from the ruins, but the red moon still hung above like a burning eye, casting its blood-colored light over the wild lands. The human led the way through uneven ground, guiding the alien woman over rocks and dried roots. His ears stayed alert for any sound behind them. They had escaped the city, passed through fire, and faced the beast below, but the danger had not ended. In the distance, faint horns called from the city walls. The hunt was still alive. The woman moved beside him, her breathing still uneven from the fight. The broken chain hung loosely from her hands, swaying with each step. She kept glancing at him, as if trying to understand why he had done all of this for her. Finally, she asked, her voice soft but clear, "Do you know what you have done?" The human looked at her, his expression calm. "I broke your chains." She shook her head. "You defied the will of the gods. My people believe the one who frees the condemned from the pillar changes the fate of the world. Either they save it, or they destroy it." He didn't slow his pace. "Then I guess we'll see which one I am." They climbed a small ridge. From the top, the land opened before them, a valley filled with silver mist. Beyond it, dark forests stretched to the horizon. In the far distance, strange shapes moved under the moonlight. Too far to tell if they were friend or foe. "We can't go through the valley," she said. "It's where the hunters will look first. Then we go around," he replied. Scanning the terrain, his eyes caught a faint trail winding into the hills, barely visible under the mist. They followed it, moving in silence. Each step took them farther from the red moon's glow, until the shadows grew deeper. But the silence was broken by a sound, soft, steady, like the beating of giant wings. The woman stopped, looking up from the clouds above. A shape emerged, enormous and dark, a warship, alien in design. Its hull covered in glowing lines, its shadow passed over them, and the ground vibrated under its silent power. Her eyes widened. That's not from my city. That's from the High Dominion. They only come for great crimes, or great threats. The human's jaw tightened. Guess they think we're both. The ship slowed. Hovering in the distance, beams of pale light cut through the mist, sweeping the ground. Searching, they dropped low, moving quickly between jagged rocks. The woman led now, her knowledge of the land guiding them to a narrow canyon. The walls rose high on each side, hiding them from the beams above. But the sound of wings came again. This time, smaller shadows swooped overhead, flying scouts, their glowing eyes scanning the canyon floor. The human grabbed her hand, pulling her into a crack in the canyon wall, just wide enough for the two of them to press inside. They stood still, breaths quiet, as the scouts passed above. When the sound faded, they stepped out, moving faster now. The canyon ended in a slope that led into the dark forest they had seen earlier. Under the trees, the air was cooler. The moonlight broke into scattered silver patches on the ground. The forest was alive with distant sounds, rustling leaves, snapping branches, and the call of unseen creatures. The woman slowed, finally, speaking again. When you cut my chains, you didn't just save me, you took my fate into your hands, and by our laws, I am bound to walk wherever you walk, fight wherever you fight, until your fate is done. The human stopped, looking at her for a long moment. Then I guess you'd better be ready, he said, a faint smile touching his lips. She smiled back, but there was a weight in her eyes. She knew what was coming, and it was far from over. In the distance, through the trees, the faint glow of campfires flickered, not from hunters, but from travelers. Their voices carried softly, friendly, and unaware of the danger moving in the night. The human and the woman exchanged a look. Without speaking, they agreed to approach carefully as they stepped into the light of the nearest fire. The travelers turned, eyes widening at the sight of them. A human covered in dust and blood, and an alien woman with broken chains wrapped around her hands. One of the travelers stood slowly, his voice low. You're the ones from the pillar. They're saying the gods are angry, that the earth will shake before dawn. The human met his gaze, his voice steady. Let the gods be angry. I'm not done yet. Far above, the warship moved again, its glowing lines brighter, its shadow spread across the forest like a warning. The woman stepped closer to the human, her voice firm now. Then let's defy fate together. The fire crackled, the wind shifted, and the hunt for them continued in the dark. But neither of them looked back. They walked forward, into the unknown, the sound of drums and horns fading. Behind them, and under the blood-red moon, the first step of their shared destiny had begun.